All right, guys. Welcome to the first panel of the National Civic Leadership Training Summit. I will be your host today, Evan Malbrough. I am a recent graduate of Georgia State University with policy, as well as the founder of the Georgia Youth Poll Worker Project. And we have an amazing panel for you guys today. The theme of our entire program is Take Your Power Back. And I have a group of people who have been doing just that for a long time. And I'm really excited to talk to them and really dive in. So I'm going to introduce all of our panelists. So we have one of our first panelists is Marisol Conde Hernandez. She is a very resilient lawyer. She became New Jersey's first ever undocumented lawyer in October of 2018. And then she has been working within her community in immigration law and being an advocate for her community. She serves as a very shining light for all those people who are undocumented in our country. And thank you for being here, Marisol.
Thank you, Evan. I'm really happy to be here.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And then we have Usjid Hameed. Usjid Hameed is also a former ambassador as well as a Puffin Fellow. He is the fundraising co-chair of NLC Columbus, where he serves as the director of governmental affairs and a development director of CARE Ohio. He focuses on public policy, civic engagement, fundraising, and outreach to empower and to defend the civil rights of American Muslims in the Buckeye State. And then finally, oh, you want to say anything, Usjid?
Nope. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here. Thanks for being here. And then finally, we have the Honorable Park Cannon. Park Cannon serves as the representative for District 58 in the Georgia House of Representatives, which is, fun fact, was my district when I was in college, where I lived. And Park Cannon has been an amazing advocate for LGBTQ rights, voting rights, as well as pro-choice legislation in the state of Georgia, which has been a very contentious issue in the past coming years. So thank you all for being here. I'm really excited to dive in and really learn about what you guys are doing in your communities, where you guys see room for growth, and how others can follow in you guys' amazing footsteps. So a few weeks ago, one of America's greatest civil rights leaders, John Lewis, he passed away. And he was a very shining light when it comes to all aspects of civic life, whether it be voting, whether it be gun control, whether it be pro-choice legislation. So I would love to start this panel off to talk to you guys about how John Lewis's legacy affected your lives and helped propel your advocacy. To start off with me, I grew up in John Lewis's district. I also went to school in his district as well. And I used to see him all the time. I always loved to hear him speak about how passionately he was for youth activism and how we as young people should make good trouble and really create spaces for ourselves to work and spaces for ourselves to live. And I just really believe that his work is basically the reason why I'm able to work in my field as an ambassador and as the founder of my own initiative. And I would love to hear if he's had that same effect for you. So we'll start with you, Rep. Cannon, because I believe your district and his district overlap, correct?
Yes, and thank you so much for the opportunity to be with the Andrew Goodman Foundation again. This is something that none of us could have expected, as in having to do a virtual summit and as well as the passing of a number of civil rights leaders over the past month. We have seen Reverend Joseph Lowry, we have seen Reverend C.T. Vivian, and Congressman John Lewis, all within the same breath, remind us that their legacy depends on us. I am always excited to share that I am one of the elected officials who serve at the state level of Congressman Lewis's federal level. And what we have been able to do in partnership is continue to remind people that good trouble doesn't always feel good and that trouble isn't always bad. as a movement leader within the Movement for Black Lives, as well as the chair of Sister Song, which is a women of color organization focused on reproductive rights, we come together to say that heroes like John Lewis's legacies call us to do the work. We are reminded that Congressman Lewis was our age in his 20s when he was originally getting folks registered to vote. So my hat is off to you, Evan, and to the other awesome panelists on how we will continue to immediately live out the legacy.
Awesome, thank you, powerful words. Usjid, how about you go next?
Absolutely. So, I mean, I'm inspired by his legacy as well as the legacy of many other civil rights leaders, because they remind, I think, all of us what it means to truly sacrifice everything to make change in America. And I think that it sort of puts into perspective many of the challenges that all of us face. I think, I guess I'll speak for myself here. I've never had to worry about being attacked by dogs or being beaten with batons simply because I wanted to vote or because I wanted to register people to vote. And so just understanding that that happened widely back in the time when then I guess just activist John Lewis was involved and organizing as a young man, I think really speaks to how much he was willing to put on the line for an America that he knew could exist. And so that's just something I'm reminded of anytime I feel discouraged or anytime, I ask myself, can we really make change given our circumstances? And so I consider myself actually fortunate in a way that I get to look up to his example and I get to think about him sort of as I conduct my own activism and do what I do to try to make change.
Amazing. Marisol?
So even though I grew up in a really great school district here in New Jersey, I think it's a structural problem wherein I didn't grow up, I didn't graduate high school knowing about, any civil rights leaders or any civil rights work other than, Dr. MLK Jr. And throughout my activism, throughout my journey to do what I'm doing now, and I think going forward, I've been starved for the experiences of other people who've had this uphill battle. And Representative John Lewis, despite his accolades, despite his accomplishments, was still facing an uphill battle to his dying death and to his last breath. And it reminds me that to do this work, one, is never ending. It requires perseverance and it requires a lot of faith. Throughout the days in and days out of lawyering on behalf of predominantly undocumented immigrants, and even just trying to assist with what organizers are doing on the ground, it's really easy to lose sight of, I think, the purpose, to lose sight of the energy and the resilience that it requires, because we can't achieve things overnight. But his legacy serves as an inspiration. And now that I'm an adult and I can read what I want and I'm not in school anymore, it's about, his legacy is about, I think, passing on the torch. Like the representative said, let us continue the work, let us increase the work, let's mobilize everyone else. The work will never be over. And I think that's all of our collective and individual responsibilities as Americans.
Absolutely, absolutely. No truer words have been said. So we're just going to hop right in to the rest of our questions for our panel. So in the audience today, there are a lot of young people who have either recently just graduated university like myself, or are, fresh or sophomores, juniors, and seniors who are trying to find their place in this field that we call activism. So to start off, for our first question, I think it'd be fitting is to ask you guys how you guys all started. I know you guys all have very diverse backgrounds, being all from different parts of the country. So I feel like it'd be great, set a great tone to see where did you guys start? How did you guys get to the work you are doing now? And anybody can go first if they'd like.
Okay. I'll go because I have the, I guess the first last name. I was an activist before I even realized I was an activist. It came with my personality. I was very outgoing. I like to ask questions, and I really like to assert my opinion and challenge people. I'm surprised that nobody told me that I should have been a lawyer when I was younger. That would have been a really great direction. And I knew I was undocumented, so at least with that part of my journey, it's very different than I think the majority of other people who share that same status or had the same status. I knew since I was very little, because my parents were very open with me, I knew since I was 3. So I went my entire educational trajectory knowing and understanding what being undocumented meant. Back then, people don't use the word undocumented, it was illegal, which we don't use today, thankfully. And I would hear, because I grew up in Princeton. It's a pretty affluent, predominantly white suburban community. And I was just one out of a handful of Latinos in Princeton at the time. One of my grandparents were one of the first Latinos to kind of settle into Princeton in the 80s. And we were working class. My mother and grandmother, all the women in my family did domestic work, all the men in my family did restaurant work. So whenever somebody made a comment that I thought was inappropriate or hurtful, I would just bring it up and say how it was inappropriate, and that continued. But once I got to high school, I think that all that angst, all that anger really started to get at me personally. Before, it didn't afflict me as much, but once I got to high school, it did. And I started speaking out more about being undocumented, I think as a way to protect myself with my peers and my teachers. My high school was massive. This was South Brunswick. And because I was one of the students who did really well academically, who was involved in a lot of clubs and other extracurriculars, people often ask, where are you going to go to college? Where are you going to go to college? You know, thinking that I had all these grandiose plans, but I knew that, one, I didn't even know if I could apply to college. If I could apply to college, I don't know if they'd accept me because I don't have a social security number. 3, I don't have the slightest clue how to pay it, right? I don't qualify for financial aid. I couldn't even apply. And I'm pretty sure that a lot of the scholarships I didn't qualify for anyway, because anything that asked for a social security number, I just ruled out as not being a possibility. So with the pressure of junior year and senior year of high school, everyone was asking, where are you gonna go to college? And I think that as a way to protect myself, I brought up being undocumented and the obstacles I was particularly facing. It was a very dark time in my life, not just because of the undocumented status, I had a lot of personal issues, but I felt that the more that I talked about it, the easier it was to handle those obstacles. When I got to community college, I joined a Latino students club, and they sent us on a conference. I forget where, I think it was somewhere in New York. And I attended a workshop that was led by the New York State Youth Leadership Council. It was New York's foremost, and quite young at the time, undocumented youth-led organization. And they were asking questions about the DREAM Act. And I raised my hand every time because I knew all the answers to those questions. I've been following the DREAM Act since I was 13 when it was introduced. So then after the workshop, I realized, okay, well, I didn't really learn anything new here. But they were like, hey, like, where are you from? And I got roped into their organization. I started to learn more, see kind of the work that they did. And I never stayed too much involved because I wanted to keep my work local. I wanted to work on New Jersey. New York was doing a lot of stuff. New Jersey had nothing. So I saw the need, and I started to continue using the only tool I had, which was my voice, to bring attention to the particular situation of undocumented students in New Jersey and how we didn't have in-state tuition available to us the way that New York and Texas and California did.
Oh, wow. Wow. Thank you. Thank you so much. Who would like to go next? Usjid, would you like to go next?
Sure. So I guess I think many people get involved in activism and advocacy, or at least sort of begin to think about getting involved when they sense that there is injustice in the world, in their community and society, And so, in my case, growing up, American Muslim, of Pakistani descent, in a working class family, I felt very early on that the world was sort of very unjust. Like my father, for example, and my mother would work very hard. They'd work multiple jobs, and yet sort of our family would still financially struggle. And so that's when it occurred to me that something was deeply wrong in society. And when you sort of couple that with Islamophobia that my family and I faced, again, the situation became even more apparent. And so sort of with that in the background, I remember I took a history class in my junior year of high school. And I think that sort of helped to bring everything together because, I will never forget the day when we talked about, for example, the end of World War I and how the course of human history could have been changed if certain elected officials had made certain decisions. And that's when it occurred to me that the power of the vote, especially and elected officials and also sort of the people working in that space can really change the world. And so I just sort of made the connection that, okay, if I want to make the situation better, not just for my family, but for families like my own and for people from other marginalized backgrounds, getting involved in activism and advocacy just made sense. And really what sort of got me in my current role now with CARE was the election of President Donald Trump. So his campaign was quite Islamophobic, and that's not to be political. That is just a matter of fact. He did say that he wanted to ban Muslims from entering the United States of America. And so I was a senior in college when he was elected. And so I was very concerned, like a lot of people around the country. And so I applied to jobs around the country that would allow me to sort of work in a space where I could stand up for the people that I felt were going to be targeted and especially challenged by the administration. And I was in Maryland at the time. And I ended up getting a job with the CARE chapter in Central Ohio. And I'll never forget the day that they offered me the job because I was so happy. And so a couple days after walking the stage in May of 2017, I just packed up everything and moved to Ohio to begin work.
Oh, wow, that's amazing. That's amazing. I'm sure that's a very large difference moving from Maryland to Ohio. I could never even imagine.
Yeah, well, at least Central Ohio is much more flat and much more cold. But it's not like night and day.
Oh, wow. All right, well, Rep. Cannon, how about you?
When I was in college in North Carolina at UNC Chapel Hill, I started to take women and gender studies courses, and they started to help me put language to how I was feeling. I was finally able to identify as queer and to understand why that felt different to me than other parts of the LGBTQ community. I was able to articulate why being pro-choice was not just about access to abortion, but was actually about reproductive justice and economic attainability for all, as well as being able to live in safe and healthy communities. So as I started to get my verbiage together in college, I started to look back at my high school career and my middle school career, and I realized that my activism just looked like Marisol said, my personality. When I was a senior in high school, I was not old enough to vote when President Barack Obama was running for office. So I created a modern dance piece entitled Yes, We Can, and performed it in front of my school. And in middle school, I would always sign up to do the Black History moment of the day during the month of February when we would have that opportunity. So when I got through college, I started to realize that I needed to write down my stories and realize that those pieces of my activism, although they had not been covered by the media or awarded by an organization, they were still very important to how I wanted to advocate for a better world, which is why as soon as I graduated college, I came back to Atlanta and ran for office.
Amazing, amazing. All right. Well, thank you guys so much. Thank you guys. And just before we go into the rest of our questions for our wonderful panelists, I just want to read you guys some statistics, specifically related to Rep. Cannon and Marisol. So a few states, for example, the Center for American Women and Politics states that out of the 2,132 women that currently serve as state legislators, only 538 of them are women of color. And those 2,032 are only 25%, or roughly 25% of the 7,383 state legislators nationwide. So talk about an amazing statistic to overcome. And thank you so much for being here. And then to Marisol's point about not being in it, I believe sorry, I'm finding it. Oh yes, the Hispanic National Bar Association reports that only 13,000 there's only 13,000 lawyers in the United States that identify of a Latinx origin. So it's just really amazing to see you guys really take the reins. You guys are pretty much the definition of taking your power back. And it's really amazing to see you guys here. And so I'm gonna go into some questions, some more questions rather. So our next question, and I will direct this questions toward Usjid. So Usjid, you were a former Andrew Goodman ambassador, right? You served at your university. You were one of in the original cohort of Andrew Goodman ambassadors. So how has your work as an Andrew Goodman ambassador, then moving on to being a Puffin fellow, affected you in your work in working with CARE as well as building your own initiatives?
I think that it has taught me the importance of coalition building and understanding that if you want to make change, you need to understand the system, or I guess just the game, right? And then you need to understand who are the players in the game. So if you want to, say on your campus, you want to get a polling location, you need to find out what are the entities that have to agree to that, who are the important sort of people involved in those entities. And so I sort of take those same principles and I apply them to my work at CARE. And also just I think also one thing that we did on my campus at Towson University is that we also tried to innovate and we tried to be creative and we tried to find new ways to engage people. And so that's something that we also think about at CARE Ohio is how can we find new ways that could potentially be better to engage American Muslims in our state. And so sometimes those ideas work and so sometimes they don't work, and it's okay if the result is not what we hoped it was, because that's a part of the process. And so just being comfortable trying new things is very important.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Rep. Cannon, my next question is actually for you. So the South has historically been known for systematic voter suppression, specifically of Black and other marginalized communities, right? And it's kind of reflective of the fact that a lot of our greatest leaders came out of the South, right? You had John Lewis, who was in Troy, Alabama. You had Martin Luther King, who was born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia, right? And in fact, down the street from your district, or might be in your district. So what advice would you give to a Southern activist who may feel that, they're losing, they're fighting a losing fight, right? That, they see all these instances of voter suppression, but oftentimes they feel that there are issues that are popping up almost as fast or even faster than the issues we're shooting down. So what advice would you give to them?
The advice I would give as a part of the grits community, girls raised in the South, is to get up and get ready and get out there, get involved, and don't be afraid. I know that I hear my grandmother's voice when I get up in the morning to tell me, you don't know where you're going to land today. Get ready, make sure that you are presenting yourself with your best foot forward so that you're already not starting at a disadvantage, because many of us do feel disenfranchised and disadvantaged when we interact with social, civic, or government entities. For example, the voters in Fulton County right now, we're trying to continue to pull off an election, but knowing that we were the place where people had to wait 6 hours in line to vote last time. And unfortunately, all of that voter suppression is not on the responsibility of the typical enemy, maybe the person who people consider to be the architect of voter suppression in the state of Georgia, our Secretary of State or our governor. It's not only that, it's actually sometimes at our county level. They run out of paper on election day. They don't have PPE for their poll workers. They don't have signage that says that your polling place changed. And so what I would recommend and advise people to do is to look far and wide for voter suppression, but also look up close and try to see how you can bridge that divide, just like you're doing, Evan. Ask your friends to work the polls, ask the people around you to go with you to vote, and make sure that if there is someone who has an issue or a consternation around their vote actually being counted, sit and talk with them so that we can try to get them to the other side.
Awesome, thank you so much. And before we leave off that topic, so when it comes to grits, sugar or salt and pepper?
Wow, what an easy question. But for the purposes of this dialogue, because we've got folks from all over the country, I will just say, if you come to my kitchen, you will have grits with butter and salt and pepper.
Ah, man, I'm so disappointed, man. It's sugar all day. Sweet grits are the key. But thank you so much for your opinion. Marisol, so when I was reading your history and writing questions for it, your journey has been amazing. So first of all, just for my own personal ignorance, I did not know an undocumented person could be a lawyer, right? And it never even crossed my mind, just because of how our country is set up and how our country kind of sees undocumented individuals. So could you please go into the process of you becoming New Jersey's first undocumented lawyer, and what barriers you face as another law student / person applying to be in the bar would face?
Okay, so it's safe to assume that a person without legal status in the United States could not become an attorney in their respective states. Right, to become an attorney, you have to apply to the state bar where you want to practice, right? It's not up to the federal courts. And there is a federal law that defines a public benefit, things that are not available to the undocumented population, considers professional licensing, right? Like a law license, as a public benefit. So the only way or reason that that issue became up is because there were students who refused to take no for an answer and just put themselves in the pipeline anyway, irrespective of whether you would be able to license and practice or not. I'm technically not New Jersey's first undocumented lawyer. It's a young man also from New Jersey. He graduated from a law school in Philadelphia and was admitted to both Pennsylvania and New Jersey. I was the second, but the first Latinx, the first cisgendered woman. But I was the first undocumented person to graduate from a law school in New Jersey.
Oh, wow.
Which was hard. It was very hard. And trust me, it's not because I'm not a smart person. You know, all my professors, all my teachers, all my peers, my boss can tell you I'm intelligent and I'm a quick learner and I work hard, whether I'm bartending, waiting tables, studying, you know, practicing, I work really hard. But what made it hard was that I was not emotionally prepared for studying law, right? I have been depressed on and off since I was 9, but my worst episode was when I got to law school. I was working full time and going to law school part-time, which was in itself like a full-time job. And I had to do that because I could only afford to go to law school part-time. I was paying for it out of pocket. And I live on my own. I've got all my living expenses, and I've got that hefty law school, public school term bill every semester. And more often than not, throughout law school, throughout the 4 years I was there, many months, it was, do I pay my tuition bill or do I pay my rent? So I had that immense financial stress on me, but I was not prepared. I did not expect that every single time I would have to read a case in one of my textbooks, I would be directly confronted by the legal system's history and intense systemic oppression of women, of immigrants, of Native people, so on and so forth. All this backwards logic to justify such outrageous outcomes. And I didn't realize how much that was seeping into my spirit and how much it weighed me down. And that is the root, I think, of my god-awful depression in law school. I thought about quitting. It was so bad. I just didn't have the energy to do anything. But the reason I stuck through it was because I was privileged enough to do a summer legal internship at the Harvard Legal Aid Bureau, which is the nation's oldest student-run clinic, where Harvard law professors essentially teach and train and supervise Harvard law students to do a bunch of different work: family law, housing work, foreclosure, eviction work. And I was one out of maybe 12 students in the country who applied for that position in the summer that was selected. So I got to live in Cambridge, work in Cambridge and Boston, taking on some of these cases that the Harvard law students were managing throughout the school year, but we got to manage and take them over through the summer. I was assigned to the housing unit, and that was my first taste of direct client representation, where our clients were people that looked like me, that spoke like me, that came from neighborhoods like me, that ate the same food like me, that had trouble paying bills, that had employers that bullied them, that had landlords that bullied them, that put their immigration status around their neck as a way for them to not file complaints. And that's when I realized that my entire life history, all of my collective experiences put me in this space. I belong in this space because this is what I'm meant to do. It's not just that I'm smart, it's that I'm bilingual, that I read, that I write, that I speak 2 languages, that I'm very perceptive, that I read body language because of all my years of experience in restaurant work too. Everything came together during that summer legal internship, and I realized I can't give up. This is what I'm supposed to do, and I'm gonna keep doing it no matter what. But being barred wasn't easy because, again, financial constraints and then my emotional and mental health. I had to take the bar exam 3 times before I passed. And ironically, it's the last time where I realized, you know what, I don't care what happens, that I passed. And I said that to demystify people, right? Because there is a big stigma about not passing the bar exam on the first try. And when it's undergrads or graduate students alike that I mentor, it's just another standardized test. And we all know how these standardized tests are stacked up against us, right? Don't let that one other test that you have to take be the reason you don't pursue your dream or you don't pursue this path. So look, it's, thanks for all the compliments, but it's hard. It's hard. I don't want any young people to think that it's easy. I gotta be real. This is tough, but now that, we helped clear a little bit of a path, and hopefully it makes it a little easier for anyone that wants to join on after and come up after us.
Wow, that's amazing. That's great. It's great to hear from you and really learn about your story and to get the honest truth, right? I especially identify with that because I'm actually studying for my LSATs currently, so I'm about to go through that crazy process as well.
Don't
So,
let it bog you down.
what'd you say?
Don't let it bog you down. You
Well,
got
it's not the whole LSAT. It's just the logic games. I can't do them. But but thank you so much. Thank you so much. So I actually now have a question for the broader group, right? So the Andrew Goodman ambassadors, we encompass a large part of the countries. We come from different races, ethnicities, backgrounds, socioeconomic statuses, and even fields of study, right? And it's also very reflective in this panel, right? We have such a very diverse spread of panelists just amongst us four, right? When it comes to region, when it comes to race and ethnicity, when it comes to sexuality, when it comes to gender, right? So what advice, well, actually not advice, I would love to have conversations about how to build initiatives in our community that are inclusionary of groups that we have no alignment or membership in, right? So, because I feel like a lot of the ambassadors, they're in situations now where they're good advocates, but where they fall short is they don't know how to interact and how to build spaces and help groups that they know nothing about, right? So what advice would you guys give to some of those ambassadors who may be struggling with how to do it effectively? And the race to unmute the mic start.
I will go and say that some of the ways in which we internalize oppression, like Marisol was saying, can be depression, can be anxiety. And if we're not able to actually sift through those, live through those, and talk with others about them, it becomes very difficult to move on from them. So I actually did go ahead and let people know that after the abortion ban, I was not okay. As a person who has personally experienced that procedure, as well as who works in a clinic where people are actively seeking that procedure and coming from around the United States, for a government to overreach and for me to provide the minority report as the bill was on the floor and we just lost the bill by one vote, I was not okay. And I had to let people know I could still do my job, I could still lead, and I could still hear people out, but I needed to mourn and I needed to grieve alongside others who felt like their rights were being taken away, and to actually stand beside folks and say, I don't have all the answers, but let's come up with them together. Let's make our own counter protests was actually exciting because it allowed for me to bring back some of my college organizing. I remember when I was on Chapel Hill's campus and the Genocide Awareness Project came, they have a very graphic way of talking about reproductive health with very graphic displays of what they consider to be the procedure. And instead of just being frustrated and becoming, deeper spiraling into depression during college, we created a counter protest. We had cotton candy, balloons, and hugs, and we painted people's nails, and we helped people speak to their professors about not going to class. We actually let people walking by in the quad write down their concerns. So we ended up having this beautiful mural of student concerns about how this was not just free speech. So I would say, some of the opportunity lies within us reinventing ourselves and cycling through our emotional responses to suppression and oppression by calling in our own lived experience again.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Anybody else would like to tackle the question?
That was such a beautiful story, Representative. Thank you for sharing. That was beautiful. One of the things that really bothers me about a lot of and I'm not involved in it so much anymore with like organizing the immigrant community, just because lawyering takes up most of my time. But I provide assistance whenever I can, as small as it can be. But one of the things that bothers me so much is that I don't see, doesn't mean that it's not happening, but I don't see a lot of overlap between, the immigrant community and Black Lives Matter, right? As an example. And I think there are generational issues for why I think that is not, I don't see that happening. But it makes me wonder, and it makes me think about your question, right, Evan? Like, how do we break that ground, right? How do we start to collaborate? And I think that we have to be humble about what we know and what we don't understand, right? That also means we can't be all that sensitive, right? If someone corrects me, I need to be a good listener. I need to be patient. But I also can't expect someone else to teach me. That's emotional labor. And that's not the other person's or that other entity's or that other group's responsibility either. It's my personal responsibility to educate myself, to thoroughly vet all the resources, to know that they are reliable before I, even think about kind of reaching out, offering an olive branch and saying, hey, can we talk, right? Fundamentally, we're all people. And I think that's something that needs to be salient, that needs to be forward up front, right? We're all people. We feel the same way. We have the same, we all love, we all hurt. But we have to really understand how we all are victims of different systems of oppression, right? And they are all interrelated. So I think my points are to how I would want to go about it is, one, to educate myself, do a lot of reading, do a lot of self-reflection, not be offended when somebody tries to correct me, but to ask a lot of questions and to listen.
Well, thank you so much. Thanks so much. Usjid, do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, sure. So again, just to make sure, the question is, how can ambassadors make sure that they're being inclusive with their initiatives, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, so I think definitely number one, again, I think all initiatives, well, not all, but I think many initiatives do require coalitions. And I think it sort of starts with who is involved in your coalition. And so I think the diversity of your coalition, initially, it may be a situation where someone says, hey, we should get X, Y, and Z group involved because they're not here. And so I think a lot of it sort of stems with having different groups of people around you to help contribute different ideas and different perspectives. But I think also, though, on this note, I think it's important for people to also sort of, as they try to be inclusive, not to let perfect be the enemy of good. I mean, there may be an initiative in which you can't get everyone on board, and I think that that's okay. Certainly, while many issues are intersectional, not all issues are intersectional. And so there will be times where you can't organize everyone under the same tent. And so that's okay. And so just sort of telling people just to sort of think through these situations carefully, because issues can be very nuanced. And so, it's not, it's okay if you can't get everyone on board, but as long as you try and as long as you have the conversation, that's the most important thing.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much. So a thread through our conversation has been the topic of mental health, right? So, I think sometimes I think of activists kind of like our line of work. We're kind of like the strong friends to the strong friends, right? Like you got your strong friends, but then you got the strong friends they go to. And I think that's where a lot of us fall in. And I think oftentimes we're so busy fighting for someone else, fighting for what's right, fighting for systemic change, that we sometimes put our mental health to the side. And in the end, even if we do succeed, we kind of fall into depression or fall into anxiety or develop systems that never go unchecked. So what advice, first off, how do you guys practice self-care in your lines of work, right? Knowing and reading about all of you, you guys are in some pretty crazy lines of work. in your respective fields and fields that are under attack almost constantly. So first, how do you practice self-care to be able to sustain? And then second of all, what steps do you take, would you advise to give to ambassadors just starting out to maintain their mental health while being on the right side of history?
I would love to offer that my self-care practices are in the making and in the works, and I don't fully know what will work one day or the other, but I have learned that there are competent individuals who can help me to create those plans. Those can either be mental health therapists, they can be healers that create little sprays for me so I have a nice aroma before I walk into a room. They can actually be some family members who I haven't connected with in a long time and want to know more about my work. And when I realize that people do have a curiosity about why I'm doing the work, it actually helps me re-understand why I'm doing the work in those hard times. Just this past month, I took up this opportunity to run for Congress, and I was not successful in being chosen to succeed Congressman John Lewis in his seat, but I am so proud to have been nominated and to have been one of the 2 Black women at the top. Now, many people in the media, they have wanted to talk to me about it. They have been contacting me, and I just had to decide that my self-care in this conversation is to not fan the flames right now, to allow for us to bury our congressmen, to allow for our families and communities to have vigils, and then possibly to go back. And so self-care sometimes looks like solitude and alone time for me. Other times it looks like continuing to lead, but being very strategic about how I actually allow my voice to be carried.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Sure. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Look like we're having some connection issues there for a second. So yeah, I mean, in terms of my self-care routine, definitely a lot of it revolves around living a healthy lifestyle and going to therapy when I need it. Some people go to therapy regularly, but I think it's also okay if you go whenever you need it, maybe like once every couple months just to do a check-in. And then in terms of what ambassadors can do for self-care, I think, again, a lot of that sort of going back to what the representative said really just depends on what they need in that time. But what I will say is that sometimes, and I'm not a self-care expert, but I've just read a couple articles online. So, advice however you want. But I think sometimes self-care can sort of come off as people indulging in behavior which can make them feel good in that moment, but does not lead to sort of long-lasting, like either sort of mental, emotional, or physical health. And so I guess it's just sort of recognizing the difference, I think, between engaging in a behavior that you're like, you know what, I want this right now, versus sort of laying the groundwork to creating sort of a sustainable self-care routine, which is going to pay dividends moving forward. And so that can be, for example, telling yourself, okay, I want to exercise these 3 days of the week before class or after class, whatever it may be. And so, like when you're doing it the first week or, first 2 weeks, you might just be like, wow, this really sucks. I don't want to do this. But after that, you will begin to really like it, and sort of all different parts of your life, at least in most cases, will improve. And so that's just one example. Again, it doesn't have to be fitness. That's just what it is for me. So that's why I'm using that as an example. But, it could be, making time to knit if you're into knitting. But again, people have to be intentional with their self-care to really scale it out and to make it sustainable, and not just look at self-care as doing something, one-off that may give you instant gratification.
Awesome. Thank you. And Marisol, you want to round us out?
Sure. Your question made me think a lot about my early 20s when I was so productive. It was disgusting, where I was working full time. I was working about 80 hours a week at a restaurant. I was taking, I was going to college part time. I still had to do my classwork, and I was doing my activism. Like, I was gung ho. I was lucky if I even got to sleep 5 hours, but because I was so young, I didn't feel it. And let me tell you, it has bitten me in the butt. So what young people, I think, can do, by me reflecting on my own experience, is to do your best to be present. Do your best to reflect. I love the representative's idea about keeping a journal, right? Keep a journal about your feelings, about your thoughts. It doesn't have to be every day, 8 o'clock before you go to bed, dear diary. No, it's just, you get a thought, you write that down, and you have to really be aware. Try to make yourself aware. Check in with yourself. How are you feeling today? Did you eat? Did you drink enough water? Are you tired? You have to check in with your mind. You have to check in with your spirit. You have to check in with your body. Your body is insanely smart. Trust me, that little bellyache that you just, dismissed could be because you're really stressed out. Racing thoughts, that's not always a good thing, right? It is not healthy to be productive, right? It is not a thing to gloat about that, oh man, I only slept 3 hours. Like, I'm so wired. I can keep doing this all day. That's not good. Be present. You've got to check in with yourself, and you have to listen to the people closest to you. I know that my parents, some of my closest friends, were really concerned about me. And I was like, no, I'm fine. I'll just have another cup of coffee. And if I could do it all over again, I would certainly do it different. Now I have little sticky tabs at my desk. I have them at home on a little cork board, things that I need to do every day to take care of myself. A lot of things that I already mentioned. Did I drink enough water today? Did I take a 15-minute walk during lunchtime? Did I sweat 3 times this week? Have I been sleeping okay? And when I realized that I wasn't sleeping that well and I was having all these nightmares, I took myself to a doctor, right? You have to be your best advocate for mental health and physical health, right? No one else can do it for you. You can't advocate for the world and advocate for justice and peace if you can't even get that for yourself, right? So you've got to be your own best activist for yourself and for your longevity and your health.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And I'll add a little bit to this. One thing I do for self-care, this was before COVID, of course, so it wouldn't be applicable now, but I watch movies. I am scared of my phone almost completely. Every time my phone vibrates or rings, it's always going to be something that's either wrong or somebody wants me to do something, and I'm just scared of it. But with movies, you have to turn the phone off, and you can be immersed in a whole other world for 2 hours, and you just be completely separate from what you do. So I guess that would be my little tidbit of advice. Find something where you can immerse yourself in somewhere else, and then so you'll be able to go back and focus on what you need to do. So we're coming to the end of our panel. So I have one more question for all of you, right? So what advice would you give what's one piece of advice you would give to somebody who wants to be in your position, right? So Usjid, for you, what advice would you give somebody who was, spurred by what's going on, who decided to get involved, create their own initiative, and really make a difference in their community? Marisol, somebody who honestly just wants to be an attorney, because I'm sure that's just as hard as it can be. And then for you, Rep. Cannon, what's your advice to somebody who's, let's say, in your position, just graduated from college and wants to run for office somewhere? So any order, and then that will be the wrap up of our panel.
Well, I'll just say, because we are less than 100 days from the November elections, there is something we can all unite around. We can all find one candidate who we enjoy, who we hear our voice in. Even if they're not in your community, you can still support them, because that's how grassroots campaigns work. There is this opportunity that we all have to take our democracy into our own hands and to be responsible for our democracy. Of course, we can point fingers at different elected officials or leaders who have or have not done what they need to do. We can also step up and take our own communities into our own hands. I think that as panelists, we all bring the experience that there have been times where our voices have been downcast or spoken down to or not even uplifted. And we have created our own paths in order to do that. By being the first openly queer elected official in the United States when I became elected in 2016, and the youngest ever in the state of Georgia, so many people wanted to say, it's the first time that this has been done, so you tell us exactly why we need to support your community or your issue. And I had to push back on that and say, it's been all of these years since you've never listened to our voice, and now you expect us to come here and tell you all of the solutions? No, this has to be a back and forth dialogue. So for anyone who is feeling that pushback in being in the activist community, I am with you. I hear you. I'm trying to muddle through it myself. And our ancestors deserve our working towards a better state of our lives. Our people who are passing away, Black trans women, undocumented folks, Marines from the Latinx community, folks who are Muslim and who believe and pray every day but still see violence on their streets. We all need to continue to come together and to remind the enemies that we might see that they're not always outside of our communities. Sometimes those phobias actually show up as trigger responses to things that we didn't know we were responding to. And I would love to pass it to Marisol so that she can continue to give some advice to the folks who are in this awesome.
I was so taken by what you said, Evan, I forgot what the question was.
So that's where we're at. So going back to what advice would you give to somebody that one day wants to be in your position?
To someone who wants to be in not just my position, right, but to any of our position, I think on panelists, as the rest of the panelists, is to be groundbreaking, you need resilience, you need patience, you need a lot of love for yourself, for your community, you need a lot of honesty, you need a lot of integrity, but you also need a lot of forgiveness for yourself, because this is not going to be an easy path. Your entire life won't be easy. That's why it requires a lot of determination. I do recommend the self-reflection to be a habit that you get into. For some people, maybe a little easier than others. My significant other prays every day, every morning. That's his moment for self-reflection. I am spiritual, not religious, so I have my different ways to go about it. So I think that's what it is. And especially because of young people, listen, ageism is real. I catch myself sometimes dismissing some of my younger nieces from things that they say. And I have to recognize that, one, that's not okay, right? Just because they're younger doesn't mean that their opinion is not valid. I think that all of us here can think of an instance where a person older than us, sometimes a family member, sometimes a coworker, anybody that's older kind of looks down on us and is like, what do you know? You're young. Ageism is real. And I think that's why self-reflection is important, because sometimes there is some substance to the criticism, but sometimes there isn't. And the only way you can really arrive at that is to give it some really serious thought. And don't let the world, I think, block out. Don't let the world let you assume what's not possible. Assume the opposite. Assume everything is possible and push your way through until you accomplish what you want to accomplish.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you, man. Usjid, you'll have the last word. No pressure.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, I think sort of the advice that I would give to folks is sort of keep three broad things in mind. Definitely, I think folks need to be, I think folks need to stress persistence, preparation, and humility. And definitely starting off with persistence, like just in terms of literally how someone can be in my position. I just think that like I got my job because I kept on following up with my boss to find out, if they'd made a decision yet or not on whether they'd want to hire me. And so my boss says basically today, like I basically talked myself into my job because I just called them so many times. And so now obviously you want to be like mindful. So you can't be like, you also need to be socially calibrated with your persistence, like you can't be annoying. But for example, if someone says, hey, you know what, I'll be sure to get back to you in a week. If they don't get back to you in a week and 3 days, you should follow up. And so you can apply that to a job, to a meeting that you want to have about an initiative on your campus, just any number of things. And so again, you need to be persistent because, a lot of people in life, especially when you work sort of full-time, sort of in my role, a lot of people, they have like a lot of different balls up in the air that they're juggling. And so sometimes things can fall through. And so you may need to sort of push to just to get your point across. And then that sort of leads into the second point of being prepared. If you go to a meeting, you should know the issue inside and out. You should try to be as well prepared as you possibly can be because people recognize that. And I think that people respect that. And so that builds a lot of credibility. And so that's something that I think that people need to stress. And then finally with humility is just sort of recognizing that you can be wrong sometimes. And so, it's okay to admit when you don't know everything. And so I think everyone should be open to asking questions and sort of rethinking their position when they come across new information that challenges pre-existing assumptions.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys. That is the end of our panel. I would like to thank all of you guys for taking time out of your day to speak to us. Thank you for allowing me to be a host. I personally look up to all of you and want to be like you one day at one point in my life, all of you. So thank you guys so much for the advice. And that concludes the first panel of the National Civic Leadership Training Summit. Thank you guys.